which is like, no, this can't be. You know, Hawaii can't be its own country. I mean, we have a say in this. You know, everybody thinks that. The reality is, what's important to know is that the courts deal with evidence, okay? That's very important. It's not a political platform. So there are rules that apply, yeah, and there are procedures, yeah. There are also rules to provide for evidence as well. So what's important about the cases and what Dexter has done, I would say for the last 1.5 years, was to present the cases of Laulima clients and others in providing evidence that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists and that this court cannot claim to have jurisdiction by virtue of the Statehood Act of 1959, because without a treaty that would allow congressional laws to apply to Hawaii, the Statehood Act of 1959 would be limited to U.S. territory. You know, so you can't use an internal law of the United States to claim jurisdiction in Russia. You can't use the internal law of the United States to claim jurisdiction in Canada. You got to make sure Canada and Russia are part of the United States before that congressional law can apply. And that's where we get into the propaganda that's been taking place. But what the courts provide is that it's based upon evidence. There is this idea of what is called Lady Justice. Okay, Lady Justice is a woman, okay, who represents the courts. And people may have seen this statue of her. It's in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a woman with a blindfold on, and she's holding a scale, yeah, and it's a weighing scale. Okay, the weighing scale is to represent evidence, and the blindfold is basically to represent justice is blind. It only looks at evidence, not politics. Okay, so if the scale is in favor of the plaintiff, judgment in favor of the plaintiff. If the scale is in the favor of the defendant, then decision for the defendant. Evidence was provided in all these cases, which the courts even took judicial notice of, which according to the Hawaii Rules of Evidence states that it's irrefutable. You can't question it. So for these courts to take judicial notice of the evidence that Mr. Kayama was presenting, and then still rule against the defendants when they had all the evidence and the plaintiff had no evidence except the Statehood Act of 1959, you have right there an unfair trial. You have an unfair trial. And an unfair trial, if Hawaii is not a part of the United States, is a war crime under Article 147 of the Geneva Convention of 1949. And in 1996, the United States Congress passed the War Crimes Act to criminalize war crimes in the Geneva Convention to be felonies, which are punishments of at least a year in prison. Anything less than a year in prison would be a misdemeanor. So felonies, war crimes, under Title 18, Section 2441, is an American federal law that criminalizes the Geneva Convention grave breaches, which are war crimes. So these are very, very serious issues, very serious. And the judges and these attorneys have been acting with impunity. They think this is a hoax. They think this is rhetoric, politics.
What's interesting is that I think they've been operating as though, this isn't going to touch them.
Right.
Like you said, with impunity, that, nothing's going to touch them. And if you can address why aren't they being prosecuted? Because this point is being raised by those who don't understand, with the war crimes and war crime charges or complaints that are being filed. Those on the outside saying, well, if war crime charges are being filed against the judges, why aren't the why are these judges still walking around? Can you address that?
Well, I think it's by the mere fact that Dexter is following the procedures on what needs to be done. So you don't move to remove somebody and say it worked. What you do is you assess the situation. If there's probable cause and clear evidence that a war crime or felony was committed because of an unfair trial, you have to begin that process, okay? So that process itself takes time, okay? You have to walk through that process. Now, throughout the year and a half that Dexter Kayama has been presenting these arguments, he was actually providing the opportunity for the judges to follow the law. If the evidence was in favor of the defendants, then you're supposed to dismiss the case. You don't politicize it. And you don't rely on a law that is limited to U.S. territory when the evidence clearly shows Hawaii is not part of the United States. So that's the point. And that's what Dexter is doing as the attorney, is he's following the procedures. You cannot fault him or the clients of Dexter for bringing these issues up. These are legal issues. These are issues that are irrefutable. These are issues and evidence that the courts have taken judicial notice of. What has happened is because the courts have not dismissed the cases, is what led to where the clients are right now in this situation. And their rights have been violated. When you're talking about property, you're talking about where they live. These are very serious issues. You just don't perceive yourself to have jurisdiction when you really don't, but that leads to an eviction, that leads to removing somebody from their home. These are very serious issues, very serious. So that needs to be the focus, and that's why an unfair trial is a war crime. And that's why an unfair trial is a felony as well under the United States federal law, which applies outside of the United States as well as within the United States. So Title 18, Section 2441 is not a U.S. law that is enforced in foreign countries. It is a U.S. law that is enforced through the military that is in foreign countries, through the laws of occupation. Okay, that's where it applies, and that's all stated in it's a judicial report that was that accompanied the 1996 War Crimes Act that Congress passed.
Yeah. So, for people listening to the show, they're trying to say war crimes. How is the war crimes being applied here in Hawaii? Because for all they know, all their lives, all they've seen is U.S. laws. They've been born and raised with U.S. laws, so forth and so on. And how is it that now we're saying war crimes now apply to these people here in Hawaii?
Well, up to the point of where this evidence has been presented, the judges, as myself, they didn't realize Hawaii was not a part of the United States. There was a move on Americanization in the early 1900s that basically indoctrinated the people of Hawaii through the school children in the public schools starting in 1907, that made them believe that this was America and that the American flag was their flag and this country was their country and English is the language. That is a war crime itself. Okay? Germany, the Nazi officials were actually convicted on Germanization of occupied territories. They were convicted at the Nuremberg trials. What happened with Germany in these occupied territories, well, they failed to accomplish what they wanted to. The United States administration and individuals within the state of Hawaii, the islands, commonly referred to as the Big Five, the plantation, who were in control of the territorial government, they were the ones who instituted this plan of propaganda. So we've been led to believe something that's not true. So you might say we've been kidnapped, but we're treated like we're adopted. There's no adoption papers. We're still kidnapped. And this is a consequence. These court cases are just one byproduct of the bigger picture of an illegal occupation, which calls for the compliance of international law and for the United States military to step in to begin to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law and prepare for transition and restoration of the government according to the agreements, which are treaties made between Queen Liliuokalani and President Grover Cleveland. Those treaties are still binding today. And those treaties is what the judges have been taking judicial notice of as being irrefutable. But they still are denying everything, and they're providing an unfair trial. Now, if they did what they're supposed to do, meaning dismiss the case, they could dismiss it without prejudice, which means they could allow the plaintiff to file the case again, but just provide the evidence that the court has jurisdiction other than stating because of the Statehood Act. That's not the case. It's almost as if the judges are becoming co-counsel with the plaintiffs, which are the banks, to quash this. And it's only getting worse. It's only getting worse.
Well, I think one of the profound documents that I've read that that just came out, and Attorney Dexter Kayama shared this with me, was a letter that he got from the ICC that confirmed that they had received the complaints from him. Maybe you can address that, and what does it mean for people here in Hawaii, and also what does that mean to the judges, and what is it?
Well, Dexter made specific reference to a letter that he received from the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. I know we're kind of running low on, short on time with this show, but we wanted to continue on the next show.
We can touch on it now, and then we'll get into it in the next show. But I just wanted to wet people's whistles so that they know that we're going to be getting in depth on this, just so that they know.
Well, basically, the International Criminal Court is an independent court that was created in 1998 by what is called the Rome Statute. That's when a bunch of countries got together, including the United States of America under President Clinton, to form an independent court that would prosecute individuals for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. War crimes specifically laid out in the Geneva Conventions, okay? One of which is an unfair trial in an occupied state. Now, that International Criminal Court came into creation in 2002. Now, these countries would have to agree to the jurisdiction of the court as a court of last resort, whereby the country and the government would allow the International Criminal Court to step in and prosecute individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. These are international crimes. But the court is a court of last resort. They complement the government of the country itself that agreed to the jurisdiction. They do not circumvent that authority. So primary responsibility belongs to the government of that particular country, okay? If that country is occupied, the responsibility of prosecution belongs to the occupier, okay? In this case, the Pacific Command. Now, if Hawaii was a part of the United States, okay, if it was a part of the United States, the International Criminal Court would have sent a letter to Mr. Kayama stating that they don't have jurisdiction because the United States did not agree to the jurisdiction of the court. Okay? They still haven't agreed. They helped create the court, but they haven't submitted the necessary ratification to allow the court to have jurisdiction within the territory of the United States. Okay? The letter that Dexter received from the court is acknowledging receipt of his complaints and saying that it would be analyzed in accordance with the Rome Statute. And it was dated March 4th, 2013. Now, that date is the date when the court has jurisdiction in Hawaii, okay, because of paperwork that was filed. And we'll cover that in the next show, okay? But this letter acknowledging receipt of the complaints also is acknowledging that Hawaii is not a part of the United States. Okay? Because the International Criminal Court cannot venture into the territory of the United States without the United States' consent. They did not approve the court yet, the jurisdiction of the court. So Dexter would have received, if Hawaii is a part of the United States, a letter, and we'll show this the next show, okay, a letter that will go in detail, stating that the court does not have jurisdiction because the United States did not agree to the jurisdiction of the court. And until that time, when the United States does provide jurisdiction, can the International Court intervene? Okay? So what Dexter received was a letter acknowledging the complaints. Now, if I was a judge, and I was the bank, and I was these attorneys representing the bank, I would be very, very concerned. Because now you have international oversight, and they acknowledge that Hawaii is not a part of the United States. Yeah. I would be very concerned, because you're talking war crimes. If this was all frivolous, Dexter Kayama would have not received that letter, which was in both English and French.
Yeah. Well, not only the judges and the banks, but also the title insurance carriers that have received title insurance claims from people that have filed in regards to the defects in title, that proof have been shown that defects have been made because of what took place at the overthrow.
Well, there are called accessories before the fact and accessories after the fact. Those are criminal terms, okay? So the reason why I'm saying that the judges and the banks and the attorneys should be very, very concerned, and I'm not underestimating that, they should be very concerned, okay, is that if they assisted in promoting this illegality, this encroaching upon the rights of people to have a fair and regular trial, okay, which is a war crime, and under U.S. federal law, a felony, you can be an accessory before the fact. So if you encouraged the crime, okay, that's an accessory before the fact. If you were the ones who committed the crime, you're the principal. If you went beyond the principal and carried out that illegal act, you become an accessory after the fact. They're all tied to criminal activity.
Wow.
That is where they better be very concerned, because you can't erase what has happened, especially in the courts. There's transcripts, there's evidence, and that was all presented to the International Criminal Court in these complaints that Dexter Kayama made reference to. So they are under analysis. Now, the question is whether or not the ICC can step in at this time to prosecute. That's the question they're asking, not whether or not they have jurisdiction in Hawaii, because they have to complement the national judicial system that exists, or in our case, it doesn't exist, which would warrant their intervention, because Hawaii is a party to the Rome Statute now. And the letter that Dexter Kayama received attests to that.
So, in the next show, we're going to be answering that question. Does the ICC have the jurisdiction, and will they be interceding